So, without further ado, my colleague, Julia Bailey, who will introduce our speaker, Walter Denny. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Jean, and greetings, everyone. On behalf of the New England Rug Society, I'm honored to introduce today's speaker, Walter Denny. Those of you who have been following our NERS webinars already know Walter from his prior presentations as our very first webinar speaker in 2020, and again 2 years ago. By popular acclaim, he is back with us today, kicking off our 5th webinar season. Walter is now University Distinguished Professor Emeritus, having taught art history for 51 years at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He has served as Senior Scholar in Residence at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and among the many, many books he has written or co-authored are EPEC about Ottoman silks and velvets, ISNIC about the famous Ottoman ceramics, The Carpet and the Connoisseur about the Ballard collection in St. Louis, The Classical Tradition in Anatolian Carpets, a textile museum exhibition catalog, and the Metropolitan Museum publication, How to Read Islamic Carpets. Today, as you can see on his opening slide, Walter will be presenting an expanded version of his keynote lecture at the 15th International Conference on Carpets, or ICOC, held in Istanbul last June. His talk is about the study of carpets in the past, at present, and crucially, where such study might be going in the future. So now, from wherever you are, please join Jean and me in welcoming our speaker, Walter Denny. Over to you, Walter.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be in front of this very large audience due to the miracle, not the complete miracle, but the somewhat flawed miracle of Zoom. And I'm happy once again to be able to talk to you about a subject that everyone who has joined this lecture today, this webinar today, is interested in one way or another. My angle, as you all know, is basically that of a college professor and researcher and museum person. I stopped collecting seriously in 1970 when I got my first curatorial appointment, since curators are not allowed to collect in the field in which they curate. But I've increasingly in recent years turned my attention back to the questions of collecting as they impact upon carpet study in general. And so all of these subjects, which are interesting to me, come together in this keynote lecture that I was asked to give in Istanbul. That talk was supposed to be 25 to 30 minutes. Today's talk is supposed to be 45 to 50. I'll do my best to get started right away. However, I am not going to go anyplace until my there we go, until my my computer screen follows my orders. Now, the 15th International Congress on Oriental Carpets is a milestone in and of itself in some ways. I didn't go to the first, but I've been to many of them since the second. And this one was held in Istanbul with a number of special exhibitions. It was reasonably well attended. There were a lot of the usual suspects there and a lot of new people, especially younger people from Turkey who were in attendance. It was an interesting opportunity for me to talk about the subject that really concerns me more than anything else, and that is, where do we go from here? What is it going to be like to be a collector, to be a scholar, to be a museum person 10 years from now or 20 years from now when I'm not going to be around? And as I get older, obviously, as all of us get older, the questions of legacy begin to arise. So that is the background to why I picked this subject and what I talked about originally in Istanbul. So it involves basically my predictions, my anxieties, and my questions about the future of carpet studies. But before that, I thought we could take a look at the past and the recent present as it impacts upon most of the people who I think are tuned in today. That is, people who are interested in carpets mainly from the point of view of collecting, and also from the point of view of curating and scholarship. So I'm going to try to give you a lot of background, if I can, to give you some, not a lot of background, but some to sort of set the stage for what else we're doing today. The first thing I want to do is to introduce you to the pioneers. Most of you have heard of these names here. Wilhelm von Bode at the top from Berlin, May Hamilton Beattie, a bacteriologist from England who turned to carpet studies, Charles Grant Ellis, a person who, well, a Princeton dropout, actually, that to his credit, I guess, and interested in architectural history, who turned to carpets and became the preeminent carpet scholar of the late 20th century. Arthur Upham Pope, who was the first great scholar of Persian carpets in his monumental survey of Persian art, and Louise Bellinger, Textile Museum, who pioneered the technical study of carpets and worked with Ernst Kühnel, the German scholar, to produce a number of catalogs, early catalogs for the Textile Museum. On the bottom row, F.R. Martin, a kind of a dubious character in some ways, who led a very interesting career, wrote a lot of early stuff about carpets. He acted as a sort of a translator and guide to Swedes who came to Turkey. Rather an interesting character. Next to him, the immortal Josephine Powell, who photographed the carpet weaving peoples of Turkey. I'm putting him, although he's just a couple of years older than I, putting John Thompson in the middle on the bottom row among the pioneers, simply because the contributions that he's made over the past 2 or 3 decades have simply been, well, they've been fantastic. They've been irreplaceable. Next to him, other Hans Koenig and Robert Penner, one of the co-founders of Holly Magazine, and the first great academic carpet scholar, Kurt Erdmann, from Germany, who wrote the last, back in the 1950s, the latest full history of carpets as a medium, and whose impact on the growth of the field throughout the second half of the 20th century and into our own time has been probably greater than any other scholar, especially his enormous influence that he had on May Beattie and on Charles Grant Ellis. And then there are the collectors. I love this photograph here. Would you buy a used car from any of these gentlemen? The gentleman in the middle is Arthur Urbain Deli, poet and founder of the New York Haji Baba Club. Quite frankly, I can't tell you who any of these people are. They all look like they came off of wanted posters, with one exception, and that is the man in the back row, second from the left, the tallest person there. That is Joseph V. McMullen, the great collector whose collection was divided up among several museums, but who was a great benefactor of the Metropolitan Museum, especially, and certainly one of the greatest American collectors of all time. And then they're the dealers. It's an interesting fact that carpet scholarship as we know it today would not exist, and the knowledge that we possess in an academic sense and the books on shelves in libraries would be impoverished were it not for people who, for one reason or another, made their livelihood by buying and selling carpets. This is true to an extent unparalleled, as far as I can tell, in the history of any other artistic medium, where the people who have been the dealers have also, in many cases, been the most creative, cutting edge carpet scholars. And of course, since the title carpet dealer or rug dealer has certainly, especially in the French language, a distinctly pejorative interpretation or about it. It says more about the courage of these individuals who have more than even more than the scholars I just showed you, molded our views toward carpets today. Ben Gwiat, the famous member of the Ben Gwiat family known as the Pasha, who at one point owned or rented the Palazzo Davanzati in Florence. In the middle, Bardini, Stefano Bardini, whose museum today in Florence has one of the world's greatest collections of carpets. Duveen, Joseph Duveen, the art dealer who sold mainly European paintings, but also was involved in, among other things, the sale of the Arteville carpet. And at the bottom, four individuals, Moshe Tabibnia, whose collection in Milan is probably the most still, even with the important collections in the Persian Gulf, his collection is probably still the most important single group of carpets from the point of view of carpet history. Alberto Borralevi, who a carpet dealer, but also a consummate, a well-trained academic and an excellent carpet scholar, who has written on carpets and has made amazing discoveries. For the future, Hadi Maktabi, who we see a third from the left at the bottom, who is, however, also the heir to his family's long-lived and very well-known carpet business in Beirut. And then finally, Michael Francis, who could have been on the pioneers page as well. Michael is someone who I think everyone here must be familiar with, who has especially turned in recent decades into more and more being interested in carpet history and in carpet scholarship, and who has been writing more and more, and whose amazing archives, including dealer archives over time, helped to document the role of many of these other individuals in the history, the academic history of carpets. Now, I just put this slide in here. I used to be a collector, and I had to stop in 1970, but from 1966, 67 on to 1970, when I should have been writing my PhD dissertation at Harvard, I have to tell you, I was spending more time on looking for rugs than I was looking for, than I was working on the thesis. And these are the dealers in Boston that I recall visiting on a regular basis in those days. It's very interesting. You can see the majority of them by the IAN at the end, or Tom Chattelbosch is an exception, were of Armenian descent, and many of them were actually first-generation immigrants. That is, Harold Zerlalian, for example, still spoke. Hagop Martirosyan spoke with the accents of their upbringing overseas. A number of them were in the second generation, but these were the people from whom I learned an enormous amount about carpets, and not so much about the carpets that are in the museums, but the carpets that I used to collect and that most of you still collect. I learned an enormous amount from these individuals that you see here, named here. Now, the dealer-collector connection has produced some amazing carpet scholarship. Moshe Tabibnia, who is a dealer and collector, sponsored the publication by John Thompson, Milestones, certainly one of the best written and most provocative and thoughtful books on carpet history that I have ever seen. Michael Francis, in the second iteration of the Orient Stars catalog, Michael set out in a beautifully illustrated volume a history of the early Turkish carpet, of Anatolian carpets, with which, amazingly enough, I'm in substantial agreement. Michael and I are good friends from many, many years standing. We've had our disagreements over this or that or the other subject, but the Orient Stars second iteration catalog is an amazingly good source for learning about the history, especially of carpets from Anatolia. And then, of course, there are events. The emergence of the Holly magazine, which was Michael Francis, who, in this photograph taken in Munich in the 80s, somehow turned his face away from the camera. Michael and Robert Penner, with the pipe here in the foreground. Those two gentlemen founded Holly magazine, and Robert and Michael were also instrumental in the establishment of the ICOC. And here we see an ICOC from some years into things. I won't go through everybody here at all, but of the individuals I've already shown you. We can also add Louise Mackey and Belkis Balpanar in the front row here, who were major figures in carpet scholarship, as you all know, and others, perhaps like Martin Volkmann here, who was a major driving force in Germany in carpet exhibitions, collecting, and scholarship. Now, today we have what the kind of stuff that's coming out, academic stuff on carpets today is basically revolving around collections. That is, I have been working for some years and will be working on for some years more on on what I hope will be an academic history of the Oriental carpet that will fill in some of the things that were missing in Erdmann's publication of almost 3/4 of a century ago. Well, not quite, but getting there. And but most of what appears on the market today that gives us new information about carpets is catalogs, whether it's catalogs of established collections like Berlin, the new catalog of the Berlin collection by Anna Beselin, or another catalog of an old and very well established but long time collection, the Ballard collection in St. Louis. More new material is appearing in collections, in catalogs such as the recently appeared 2 volumes from the Khalili collection in London, the Afshar collection, which was shown in Houston in the Bestowing Beauty catalog, and just off the presses a couple of weeks ago, well, a little bit more, maybe a month ago, the Yale University Press 4-volume publication on the Farjam collection, which is based in the Persian Gulf. The first 2 volumes of this collection, which dealt with early Islamic art. The second 2 volumes dealt with contemporary Islamic art, but the first 2 volumes, which I showed you here, dealing with the entire spectrum of Islamic art, but quite a few very interesting carpets from early examples right down to examples created well into the 21st century. Now, the recent past, then, there are a couple of things I want to touch on for the recent past, and that is what's happened in new discoveries and what's happened in the marketplace. And in the future, I want to talk about the changing demographics of collecting, which I think most people who are tuned in today are well aware of. The scarcity of and the aging of academic specialists, which I am extremely aware of, a changing and challenging museum environment, and the main focus of my Istanbul presentation, which was New Frontiers in Conservation, a subject which I come to because of my these days, because I am the chair of the visiting committee of textile conservation at the Met in New York. Now, the recent past, and recent gets to be bigger and bigger the older I get. So let's say even the last half century is really the recent past in carpet studies. There have been some amazing discoveries. The rediscovery, one might say, of the famous synagogue rug, the paroquet, that belonged to the synagogue in Padua, in Italy, on the left-hand side here, which was effected by Alberto Borrellevi, who also was the central figure from our point of view in the rediscovery of 2 gigantic Cairene carpets in the Pitti Palace in Florence. It seems that, I think this is going to be true for another couple of decades. I think the most interesting discoveries that we're going to get, we've had interesting things from Tibet, a few interesting things from Turkey in the past. Well, it's been a while since the 70s, but I think Italy is still going to be the place where some of the most interesting surprises begin to show up, for reasons that I won't go into in great detail in this presentation, but which I think are probably obvious to a number of those of you who are listening here. Other discoveries which were made by dealers on the market were allegedly came from collections in Tibet, a very troubled country which has lost its national identity under the Chinese hegemony and much of its culture, which is being aggressively settled to bring it into a Han Chinese majority, and whose culture and whose religion have been basically subject to an effort to stamp them out. But at any rate, whether these things should or should not have left Tibet, they are now in the West. The very enigmatic Rug of the Orient Stars collection that has been given an extremely early date to the 11th or 12th centuries on the left-hand side, and the animal rug now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And other rather oddball things like this rug with the chessboard on it, silk pile, now in the Museum of Islamic Art, Doha. There have been more stories imagined about this carpet than I care to enumerate for you today, except to say that the latest information on this carpet, which I tend to support, is that it appears to me, despite its Holbeiny look to it in the Kufic, the open Kufic outer border, and in the medallion in the center, that there is some reason for believing that this rather oddball carpet came from a rather oddball place, and that is the Deccan, the plateau in the center of the Indian subcontinent. And then there were the rugs from Anatolia and from Transcaucasia that were discovered in the Great Mosque of Divri in the mid 1970s, a discovery in which I was fortunate to be able to take part, and which have drastically changed our views of Anatolian carpet history, and which also, as I'm showing you in these three examples here, these are all three Anatolian carpets, one inspired on the right-hand side by a Turkoman antecedent, on the left-hand side, Turkoman antecedent, in the middle by a Persian antecedent, and on the right-hand side by a Caucasian antecedent. But all of these rugs were woven in Anatolia, and they point out to us the fact that we cannot simply look at a design and tell much about a carpet anymore. I was thinking just a couple of days ago in doing some planning for a workshop that's going to be put on at the Textile Museum for museum curators, a workshop for museum curators who want to know more about the carpets in their collection, how to care for them, to conserve them, how to exhibit them, and how to deal with scholarship. That the use of online information to learn about carpets is, of course, it's increasing dramatically. We've got lots of websites and things like that. But in fact, these three point out something very interesting, and that is that in looking at carpets, we cannot. Yes, weaving and carpets are a visual art, but this visual art cannot stand by itself. It is only basically one leg of a tripod. The other two aspects of the tripod are the tactile quality of the carpet, which you can really only get by getting close to it and touching it. And the third leg of the tripod is the technical aspect, and that is when you take a really close look at these carpets, you begin to realize that they are not what their designs tell us that they are. That was one of the more interesting things that emerged from this discovery of well over 100 carpets in Divri. Today, if it's ever open and you can get into it, the Vakıflar Carpet Museum in Istanbul, of the carpets it has on display, well over half came from this single source discovered in the 1970s in Eastern Turkey. And then there's the fascinating matter of the unknown group of carpets. Many decades ago, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, a German scholar wrote Brigitte Schönemann wrote a thesis on what she called the unknown group of carpets that appeared painted by Dutch painters, but we hadn't ever seen any carpets to match the images in the paintings. And many of you, of course, know this story, that these carpets, which obviously had existed in Holland in great numbers, had completely disappeared from Europe. Not even scraps and fragments left, at least none that we know of yet. But in fact, that complete carpets similar to this unknown group did exist in the possession of guilds in Japan They came to the guilds from the collection of the shogun in Kyoto, and these carpets were originally given to the shogun, the former military dictatorship in Japan, by Dutch merchants as part of their as part of their rent, I suppose, for an artificial island, Deshima, in Nagasaki Harbor. They were not allowed to set foot on Japanese soil except once a year when they brought gifts to the shogun in Kyoto. And among them were a number of carpets like this, carpets which we now know, thanks to the research of a young Japanese scholar, were actually made also in central India, probably in Warangal in India, and brought to westward to Holland, where they were painted by Dutch painters, and eastward to Japan as bribes or as gifts to the military governors there. Another thing that has really changed, as I think many of us know, especially those who have been active in collecting over some time, has been the marketplace. We now have auctions, catalogs that instead of being published as very expensive books are now available, sometimes in remarkably good high-resolution photographs online. And we also have resources online that help us to understand the marketplace, such as Rug Rabbit and others. And there are many websites, some of them maintained by carpet dealers online, that have vast numbers of photographs of various types of carpets. Extremely useful to me as a carpet scholar to get quick pictures. We have carpets understood not as adjuncts or furnishings to a European fine art sensibility, but as part of an Islamic material culture. And today at carpet auctions at places like Material Culture in Philadelphia, you're just as likely to find weaving tools, looms, all kinds of ancillary materials that come from the same culture as the carpets themselves. This doesn't mean that we don't still have the old-fashioned carpet dealers. If you could see the image in the upper right-hand side, you may not be able to see it. Those types of emporiums, not quite like that. They still exist in the Middle East. And on its basic level, I just took this photograph of a sidewalk carpet perusal in Istanbul just a few short weeks ago in the upper left-hand corner. Now, the changing demographics of collecting, by this, I basically mean collectors are getting older and older, and there are not very many young collectors coming on the scene to replace the older ones who are dying off. And I don't know I can't predict what this is ultimately going to mean for collecting, because will prices drop? Prices have already recently dropped, of course, compared to what they were decades ago, as fewer people are interested, although in carpets, although the very best pieces still maintain a very high level of auction pricing and dealer pricing. And we are making a real effort. Organizations like NERS and institutions like the Textile Museum and the Met are making an effort to get younger people coming in and interested in carpets. Is the recent lowering of prices in the market going to make it easier for younger people to enter into the market as collectors? The answer to that is probably yes. But the second question is, are they going to be interested in carpets? That is still very much a wild card. I don't know the answer to that. I've produced a fair number of people basically knowledgeable about carpets in my courses at the University of Massachusetts over the years. I have no idea, nor do I have any idea how I would find out how many of these young people, or once young people, have today kept that carpet interest sufficiently high that they would actually go out and buy a carpet at a carpet dealer or at an auction and pursue collecting on more than a very, very basic and casual level. I just don't know what's going to happen as these demographics change. Academic specialists is an even iffier question for me. The workshop that we're giving at the Textile Museum hopes to take people who don't have much of a knowledge about carpets now, who are working for museums, and giving them the tools to understand carpets as part of a museum collection. That's the ad from reproduced here in the Islam Art online on HNet, which you see on the left here. But what about the carpet scholars? Well, Friedrich Spuler left the scholarly world and the Berlin museums to become a dealer, and has written a number of catalogs since that time. But you know, he's an old guy. He must be at least as old as I am, which means a very old guy. And how much longer is he going to be around? The young guy in the center on the top is myself, and you know, and I'm not going to be around much longer. You know, I'm in great shape today, but could be hit by a truck tomorrow. Hadi Maktabi is who's on the right side at the top, a brilliant young scholar who actually is still producing scholarship books, but his main focus has to be on keeping his family business alive in Beirut, and keeping any business alive in Beirut these days is very difficult. Dan Walker has retired after being at the Metropolitan, and then after that at the Textile Museum, and then after that at Chicago. In the center is Annette Ittig. She was one of the very first people to get a PhD in carpet studies with May Beatty at Oxford a half a century ago. It completely disappeared off the map. I Googled her and found this more recent image of her, but she's not doing very much in basic carpet research these days, as nearly as I can tell. And Sherifa Atlahan, a wonderful picture of young Sherifa surrounded by nomadic people in the lower right-hand corner. Sherifa is basically, again, in my generation, people in their 70s and 80s, and it's not clear exactly who is going to replace these individuals. Now, there are young folks working in PhD programs, but PhD programs are not interested in producing theses on 19th century, 18th century carpets, the kind that those of us who collect largely collect these days. And that whole area of carpet knowledge, that is the later carpets, far more numerous, of course, very beautiful, eminently suitable for museum exhibition, and very much a part of a long tradition of carpets. That is, they cast light backward through history onto the earlier carpets. Where are people going to learn about those? It's a really very difficult subject to ask. Who is going to be able in the coming generation? There are a bunch of brilliant young scholars, and they're doing wonderful work on classical carpets. But it remains to be seen what kind of work is going to be done by academic specialists on the more recent carpets. There's one other problem with carpets that I think deserves mention. I'm going to give it a little bit of short shrift here. And that is the need for more language capability. And I add the words without cultural baggage. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a great deal of interest in carpets as a cultural phenomenon in certain countries today. I'll give two examples: the Republic of Armenia in Transcaucasia, and the Republic of Azerbaijan in its next door, not so friendly neighbor, also in Transcaucasia. But the fact is that we need people who know languages, who know Hungarian, who know Romanian, who know Georgian, Azeri, Armenian, but we need people also who are trained as art historians and whose first allegiance is not to a nationalist cultural idea. Carpets loom very, very large in national cultural identity in certain places, especially Armenia and Azerbaijan. But we need the language capability, but just as important is we need the scholarly objectivity to go with it. I'm convinced that young scholars today, there are some working here who know Hungarian and who know Greek and who know other languages in which there's been very, very little in the way of serious looking into documents and documentary sources, that there is great potential here, but we don't, today, scholars in the great Western universities, we're still learning the French, the German, the Italian that we always learned. And if we're dealing with Middle Eastern languages. We're learning Arabic or Turkish, but not too many people are learning the languages, which I think are going to lead to the most interesting documentary discoveries. Now we get to conservation, which was the main topic of the Istanbul talk, and which I will still spend a good deal of time on today. It's nice to know that that conservation is a very vital, very almost excitingly supercharged field today in many different aspects, but this certainly does extend to carpets and textiles. My own home in New York is the conservation labs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Here you see the left-hand side, the Met's version of the Met's Emperor's Carpet. The other one is in Vienna. That was undergoing a massive amount of stabilization and conservation effort prior to its being shown at the opening of the Met's new Islamic galleries in 2011. And on the right-hand side, one of the most exciting places in the world, as far as I'm concerned, and that's the Avenir Center in suburban Virginia that houses the storage and conservation facilities for the Textile Museum in Washington. I'm convinced that a lot of what we know about our carpets, and not just the classical ones, but the more recent ones, is going to be changed by work being done in venues such as this in the future. And I'm very excited to be part of that effort in both of these institutions. Now, conservation practice and ethics have changed enormously over the past century and a half. The carpet on the left, the image on the left-hand side shows Joseph McMullen's Ottoman Turkish court carpet. It's a singleton. There are lots of Ottoman Turkish, a bunch of Ottoman Turkish court carpets. This is the only one like this. And it is, I believe, the same carpet that is actually mentioned in Ottoman archival sources, where it mentions that the great artist who was head of the Ottoman design atelier, Şakhulu, in the mid 16th century, did a carpet design, and this is probably the carpet that document refers to. When McMullen bought it, it looked like this. It had been very, very well. It was missing pieces, and it had been very beautifully and carefully restored using color-fast dye stuffs, I might add. And that was the way that carpets were exhibited. And then when it came into the Met, as part of McMullen's bequest to the Met, back in those days, they decided we didn't exhibit carpets we only wanted to exhibit the original carpet and none of the later stuff. And so this carpet had all of its beautiful restoration taken out. Now, the image that you see on the right-hand side is the way it looks today. The difference in color here is simply that one photograph was taken out of McMullen's book with too warm a light, and the other one on the right-hand side is not the way you'll see it at the Met, but the way it would look in daylight, which is something that I tend to do to photographs in Photoshop. But you can see here that there's part of it missing, and the idea is, of course, that today's museum goers are smart enough and savvy enough to not be worried about a carpet that isn't completely there. They can sort of put it together in their minds. But in fact, today we would view the restorations that went into this carpet as part of the carpet's life history. It's part of its ongoing life history, and we probably wouldn't be quite so zealous in trying to remove everything that wasn't indubitably mid 16th century in the carpet. In other words, conservation practice and ethics are a continually changing process, and today we tend to be a little bit more respectful of documenting a carpet's history, including that of repairs and reiterations, you might say, over time. And of course, we all know that carpets are extremely subject to this kind of change, the kind of life change after they leave the loom. We also, of course, have learned that carpet conservation has two interesting things have happened. The skill that went into the actual knotting skill that went into the restorations of this Ballard carpet back around 1900. The carpet, it was photographed, this color photograph, an early color photograph, was made in 1925 on the left-hand side. And the skill that went into that weaving was fantastic, but the skill that went into the dyeing was terrible. And the result is that over time, this carpet, when we had our show a few years ago in St. Louis, this carpet, which was one of the very few shown in color in the original Ballard catalog, we left out of the exhibition in the 20 teens because the discoloration, the fading of this beautifully knotted restoration, the dye stuffs, the aniline dye stuffs used had faded so badly, the carpet was deemed simply unexhibitable. Now, we do have today more rigorous standards for carpet structural analysis. It used to be that we do a knot count by simply measuring 1 inch vertically and 1 inch horizontally. And if we wanted the count, we'd multiply the two together and get a knot count. An inch is far statistically a useless measure. We need a far larger measure than that. And today we use the square decimeter, which is about 2.5 inches on a side, as a much more reliable way of getting knot count. Why is this important? Well, it's a good example would be that the carpet, the famous Arteville carpet in London, someone analyzed that. They looked at 1 inch of it and they came up with about in the mid 400s per square inch knot count. And somebody out years later, out in Los Angeles, did the one there. They did 1 square inch and they came up with over 700 knots per square inch. And for a long time, people said, "Oh my God, these two carpets, they look like they're identical." But in fact, one was done with a far greater knot count than the other. Absolutely not. Their variance is enormous. Both of these carpets were done from a paper cartoon, and therefore the knots per square inch could vary widely over the carpet, but the design would adhere to the underlying paper-based design. So it's, in fact, we need not only larger measures like the decimeter, but we need to do it in several different places in the carpet. The same is true of almost every thing that we did in a carpet, rather than when we're looking at an important classical carpet like the Anhalt, which I'm examining here in this picture on the left-hand side, we have to make multiple measurements in multiple different parts of the carpet in order to get a real picture, and then we have to average the results. And the knot here, asymmetric, open to the left, 41 vertical by 23 to 42 to 43 high, almost a 1-to-1 ratio per decimeter that you see in the, sorry, that's a completely different rug, but you get the idea of how we did it at any rate. So it's really quite a process, especially to do a classical rug. It takes a lot longer than it used to take because we're being much more careful in what we do, but we're getting far more reliable data that tells us far more about a carpet structure. Of course, this is not such a problem in smaller, more recent pieces. It's much more important in these large classical carpets. Conservation science has advanced in many ways, and I've watched this process since I first became interested in textile conservation back as a graduate student back in the 60s. Today, we have an amazing array of technical tools that we are able to use. Here's one of them being in the Met's lab that you see on the left-hand side here. The fact is that textile conservation used to be a group of women who had worked largely in textiles their entire lives, coming from places like rug repair or as seamstresses or as embroiderers, and they were basically they worked with needle and thread basically. And today, of course, in conservation, you still have to have those manual skills. It's absolutely vital but you also have to be able to understand very complex questions of chemistry, dye chemistry especially, and above all of physics in these new analysis tools that we have available. And this is the list of equipment from the Met's website on the right-hand side here. And let me tell you that some of these toys, as someone who is trying to help raise money to buy these things for the department, and that some of these toys are rather expensive, but they can tell us amazing things. And then there's the perennial question of carbon-14 dating. I remain a skeptic about carbon-14 dating for anything except archaeological textiles that are over 1,000 years old. Uh, I know that there have been attempts made to analyze Turkoman carpets, and I'm sure we're getting better at it. But as yet, in my view, still from what I've been able to learn about this, and now, by the way, certain dealers will give you a carbon-14 date with every important rug they sell. I still believe the jury's out on this as a really reliable process. And I'm not convinced that it's ever going to be reliable due to certain inherent limitations. And of course, the other problem is now that carbon-14 dating used to be something that you couldn't fake. But like almost everything else, thermoluminescence in ceramics, the minute we discover a foolproof method of showing of figuring out how old things are, forgers and learn how to bypass that entire process. They can outwit the analytical process. Of much more interest to me are the new, especially the new non-destructive dye analysis tests and other ways that we can examine textiles without having to take a little piece of them with a tweezer and yanking out a knot and then dissolving it in acetone and then subjecting it to various and assorted machinery or to a paper test that will tell us what the dye is and where it came from. X-ray fluorescence is one of these. There are many different ones here. The Textile Museum is currently experimenting with these new processes. And a young specialist named Callie German, who is, I believe, has already given some online talks on her work, is doing some remarkable work there. Now, the problem with her research is that it is being financed through a small amount of money left over from the bequest of Murad Magali, who gave the who gave the Textile Museum not only its great collection of ikas, but it's a great collection of Anatolian kilams, but the terms of the gift were that it could only be used on Anatolian kilams. So Callie is basically refining her research, not using classical carpets, where I think the payoff from the research would be greater, but is basically working on 19th century Turkish kilams. And there, of course, the provenance issue is very important. We'd all love to know where these kilams were actually made, or at least where the sheep came from. And that is one of the things that Callie's research is helping us to do. But it has this kind of research now in its beginning stages. Needs to be expanded before we have a statistically meaningful set of results. And we are also able to look very closely at fibers and determine, among other things, their diameter. And this, of course, will tell us a lot about the kind of sheep that they came from. As we become more and more sophisticated in doing this, we have the potential of learning a lot more about where carpets came from and how they were made than we are able to do today. And these discoveries will be at least as important, in my view, for in the future for the kinds of carpets that most of us collect, as well as the classical carpets. I actually think that this kind of information is going to be more important for the more recent carpets than it is for the earlier ones. Now, there are two problems with this research. The one is that you have to get enough data for it to be meaningful. And to get enough data, you have to have a lot of analysis, and a lot of analysis requires a lot of money. And the fact is that today people are only too happy sometimes to give their carpet collections to museums. But what museums need today, as much as carpets, is they need the financial support for the research that needs to be done into these carpets. That's number one. And number two is that once you've got this data, it has to be properly interpreted. And to do this, you need to have a very, very fine collaboration between the art historian, and the scientist working toward the same goal. Another interesting thing that's happened recently is we've learned how to deal with metal elements. And you know that lots of carpets, not just the famous 17th century Persian Polonaise carpets, but more recent pieces like this this Anatolian saddlebag from Turkey, which is probably a 20th century piece. On display at the Met, we've learned to do analysis of metal elements in carpets, and that has the potential of giving us a lot of extremely interesting information on how carpets were made and even where they were made. Certainly, it's important that we have new ways of photographing carpets. If you look at a great carpet book from the mid 20th century, the featuring very large carpets, I'm thinking especially of Joseph V. McMullen's catalog, Islamic Carpets, published in 1966. You realize that those huge fold-out plates pictures were taken of carpets using in a studio in which the photographer Otto Nelson had to spend hours and hours, maybe even days, on each carpet, making sure that the light was completely even across the entire vast, enormous carpet, that the camera was far enough away so that that the optical problems did not intrude. This was a very complicated business, still followed as recently as Ahmet Ertuğ's photographs for the very expensive book that I collaborated with on the collections of the Turkish Islamic Art Museum in Istanbul. Today we have the overhead gantry. We take multiple photographs of the carpet, and these photographs are stitched together in a computer. And the result is we can get enormously high resolution digital photographs of carpets. Yes, the machinery is expensive, but it is much easier than the old process of trying to photograph carpets at very large ones in one fell swoop. The only problem here was that when we did this for all the Met's carpets, the files we got on each carpet were so big that the Met's computers couldn't handle them. So I have yet to see some of the photographic results of this process that took place before 2011 in a special clean room fashioned out of the old galleries at the Met, where this gantry was set up. But let me tell you, as one who no longer climbs ladders, that this new technology is not only better, it's also a lot safer, and you sweat an awful lot less in using it. I just wanted to show you one example of what you could do with the technology. This is the famous Indian carpet in Melbourne in the National Gallery of Victoria in Australia. Gigantic carpet of 30 feet long. You could get the most amazing photographs, and you only photograph the carpet once. The resolution is so high that if you want to look at 1 square inch of it, you could just simply crop that out of this multiple gigabyte digital file, giving an image of the carpet. Digital photography is going to really make it a lot easier. It already has made things a lot easier for all of us in doing carpet research, as anyone who has gone online to find a carpet image, whether on a museum website or in any of those other marvelous websites, when you're putting together a lecture, as I do, or whether you simply want to find something that looks like something that you own. The new museum environment has its positive and its negative sides. Certainly, the new galleries in Berlin, upper left-hand side, allow us to see a lot of carpets that were previously not visible. The use of different kinds of wall structures and the availability of modular platforms. St. Louis, lower left-hand side, allows us to see carpets frequently without them having to be covered by glass in a shared space, and it helps us to get a much better look at carpets in the museum setting. The upper right-hand image is the last big carpet and textile exhibition held in the old TM in Washington, showing you everything is behind a piece of plexiglass. And this, of course, was absolutely necessary there, but we're trying to find new ways of showing carpets where we don't have that intervening glass or plexiglass with all of its problems of reflection. Museums are also much more willing to study the carpets that they have. It's quite an interesting thing. I just less than a month ago visited a North American museum that owned only one carpet, and they've never paid much attention to it. And they finally decided they had to have someone have a good look at it, and I did. And that carpet it'll be very interesting to see what they do with that carpet now that they know what they've got. Certainly, museums are led by the Textile Museum, of course, are more willing to acquire carpets. There is still, however, a prejudice against old carpets. Newer carpets of the type that we're interested in. And museums will even acquire them, but it's very difficult to get them to exhibit them. Well, new ways of displaying carpets. I practically feel like throwing up every time I see this photograph. It takes one of the oldest canards, the flying carpet idea. This is Vienna, and it puts on a show of carpets in which they're completely decontextualized, impossible to have in any historical context. Just a designer's dream, a carpet scholar's nightmare. The mysterious sanctification of the article carpet, only visible 2 minutes out of every hour at the Victoria and Albert, is another, well, it's a good thing for the carpet, certainly, since they hung it on the wall for over 100 years. It's nice that it's getting a decent treatment for the first time in its life in a long time. But well, it's positive, it's negative. There's only one carpet given this treatment. All the others, as you can see in the background, are hanging on the wall. The use of projected light and of a very elegant kick-out platform that you see in the foreground here in an exhibition of the Bruscatini collection and loan objects from Berlin held in Genoa a few years back, to my mind, is the future of we can show carpets on a black wall, but by using projected rectangles of light on the carpet, we could use actually fairly low light, but make the carpet seem like they're brilliantly illuminated. As we see here. The idea of using the large mirrors in Istanbul, well, it's perfect. It's lovely to see the carpet vertically as well as horizontally, even though it's backwards vertically. But I'm not exactly sure what we really gain from the enormous expense that went into this kind of display. The slant board concept, which puts minimum stress on the carpet, so we see in the background, I think makes extremely good sense, however. We used all kinds of interesting innovations at the exhibition of the Ginsburg collection of small bags at the Met, and showed them in cases that were multipurpose cases, but showed them in ways that made it possible for using extremely low reflective glass to get a sort of to help the bond between the carpet and its viewers develop in this temporary exhibition at the Met. The less said about Paris, the better, except that they've got minimum display for space for carpets. It's concrete board. The carpets were badly lit, and enough said. St. Louis had a dream galleries, the enormous special exhibition galleries that are infinitely you can do anything with them. They're absolutely flexible. I thought that the show in St. Louis, consisting of both platforms and walls, plus a carpet on a table that you see in the background, was one of the best that I've seen in a long time. And then, of course, most importantly, is lighting. Mounting, thanks to Velcro, most museums follow the same basic protocols for mounting and for lining carpets. At the Metropolitan, we were faced with a carpet gallery where there was no possibility of using ceiling track lighting because we had a 500 or 600-year-old ceiling up there, and so we and in the main gallery we had didn't have for Persian carpets, we had a different set of problems. That is a wooden platform that, because of the amount of time it takes a wooden platform to off-gas, which may be up to a half a century, we have to use an enormous piece of very expensive paper under every single carpet when we roll out. And in the background, you can see on the back right, a carpet with a kick-out box and a roller underneath it, because even these enormously high galleries cannot accommodate vertically some of the larger bed carpets. And we have new ways of hanging things. It's funny, though, that in most museums today, we've gone back to the whole idea of a picture molding and cables stretching down the walls, which almost all museums had abandoned in the 70s and 80s of the last century, and now they've come back to it. The new lighting concepts that I showed you before, used in Genova in the exhibition, have enormous potential in my view for the showing of carpets. Although I wonder if lighting on demand that turns on when a viewer comes up to the carpet and goes off when the viewer turns away might be even better for the carpet in the long run. These new lighting technologies that we used in the Met, which are almost completely invisible lighting, is, I think, going to have the longest impact on the way carpets are shown. Lighting, hiding the lighting of the platform in the railings, and then the lighting the ceiling of the room and the carpets on the walls by these almost completely invisible, what I call magic wands, that are almost impossible to see in this photograph of the Met Gallery, which, by the way, shows the light far, far brighter than it actually exists due to the miracles of Photoshop. So the big questions for the future: what's going to be, when you go to an auction or a dealer, what's going to be there? Are we running out of old stuff, or is it going to be endlessly recycled? Where are the carpets going to come from? Are there going to be more things like Tibet showing up, or more things like the end of the Soviet Union, which saw an enormous outflow of carpets from Transcaucasia? How are carpets going to be stored? Well, better, I hope, conserved more scientifically, and displayed. Well, that's the big question. Are they going to be displayed at all for the public to view and learn about in the future? Where are the new carpet collectors going to come from? This is my class in Marshall and Marilyn Wolf's apartment in New York about 20 years ago. I don't know how many of them. I could spot one person in this picture who's still very much interested in carpets, but she's just been named chief curator at the Mount Holyoke College Art Museum, and she's got a lot of other things on her plate besides carpets now. I don't know what's happened to the others. I hope they're keeping their interest up. Now, at the end here, I just wanted, very quickly, I read a bit over time, want to add my thanks to Alberto Morlevio, who had me give the paper in Istanbul, to Jean and Julia for give me a chance to make it too long for you today, and to Tom Farnham, who's the one. Tom is a historian, trained as a historian, and he is the one who is teaching us all about how carpets became part of American collecting history. And I thought I should mention him in connection with this event, which is happening in a very short time. Tom Farnham's discussions of two great American collectors, Marquand and Ross. Ross especially important for the Boston area. And I also want you to be aware of this exhibition, which includes, among other things, archives of Charles Grant Ellis at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C., that gives you a little bit of insight as to how carpet scholarship began. And so, 10 minutes too late. Thank you very much for your attention. If anybody knows what this carpet is on the left-hand side, I wouldn't mind hearing about it. You can send me an email, and we'll now move over to your questions.
Thank you, Walter. A wide-ranging, comprehensive, and challenging presentation. You've given us all much to think about. And I will note that this is an audience with many illustrious members in it, including some you even referred to and people you showed in your slides. So I encourage people to post questions, even if you haven't already. Let's start with some controversial ones. We have one person who notes your association with the Metropolitan Museum and says they show very little in terms of Islamic or Persian carpets. why? How can we get them to show more? And how can academic research increase if the Met shows so few carpets? What do
Well,
you think?
I'm puzzled by that question. The museum, when it reopened, we reopened our galleries in 2011. We had almost 45% more space than we had had previously, and almost all of that space was devoted to carpets and textiles. The Met shows more carpets on display, permanent display, than probably any other museum aside from the carpet museums in Istanbul that I can think of in the world. Yes, we have 500 carpets and we may only be showing you 45 or 50 of them, but we have the two largest spaces in the new Islamic galleries, the Safavid galleries and the Koç family galleries have a very large display of carpets. We have in the under that ceiling that I just showed you, we have a modular platform that can adjust to the sizes of many different carpets, from the long and narrow Simonetti vase carpet, Simonetti Mamluk carpet, to the to shorter and fatter carpets as well. And the granted, the Met is not, to my mind, showing as much of the later carpets as I would like to see them show. But on the other hand, we did have that exhibition of small bags recently that was just, it was a first for the Met. Totally nomadic pieces, totally small pieces. So I'm a little bit puzzled by that. Yes, for a real true carpet fanatic, why don't they just get rid of all those other things, the metalwork, the ceramics, all the other things, and just devote the entire thing to carpets? But I think if you go to the Met, you see a very good cross section, and there are more recent carpets. There are a few 18th, 17th, and 18th, and even 19th century carpets on display in what we used to call Gallery 10. That's the Koç family galleries. So I'm not sure that I understand that question, but I would say that the Met is certainly showing far more carpets than it has ever shown before, and because we are rotating, every time you go back, you should be seeing different things.
Yes, speaking to one who loves the Met's carpet display and loves the fact that they are rotated, and it's really they do a wonderful job, and thank you for your influence on that. Let's talk a little bit about display. So you have the courage to cite some displays you think are awful. One in Vienna, I don't know, perhaps you could mention what museum in Vienna that is.
There's
I
only
know,
one museum in Vienna that has a significant carpet collection, and that's the Museum für Angewandte Kunst, known as MAK, M-A-K, the Museum of Applied Arts. A fabulous collection of truly fabulous carpets. But the display, the last two displays they've had of carpets have been designed by designers who had no respect for carpets and who had no knowledge of the carpet medium or its history, and there was no one at MAK to defend, on the curatorial staff, to defend the carpets. So the designers produced what I consider to be really, really very disrespectful and very, very useless displays. If a museum is supposed to be an educational institution, I think the display should be for the works of art. The works of art should not have to serve the designer of the display. I don't go to museums to see display art. I go to museums to see works of art.
thank you. And when you were in Istanbul in June, did you get a chance to see the Kilim exhibition at the Tophané?
No, I did not, but I know the Tophané's architectural arrangement. It's a cannon foundry. It was a place of belching furnace and puddles of bronze and enormous molds for the casting of cannon with a bore of almost 3 feet. It's and not necessarily best suited to the display of carpets. And it's my understanding that that they were only given an extremely short time to put the display up. So so I wonder if that's why you're asking me that question. If there was there something there that you saw that you thought might have been amiss, or was there something there that you liked very much? I'll ask.
The latter. I was going to be provocative, and this was my question. The exhibition of the Tophané was extraordinary and presented the carpets with no labels, very simply against Black backgrounds, very, very respectfully, really as extraordinary works of art. And I wonder, as a scholar, what you thought of. I imagine you would have agreed that it was a most respectful presentation, but I wondered what you thought of the lack of labels and words to provide context. But since you didn't see that amidst the splendors of Istanbul, we can't hear your views.
I could give a really short answer to that and say that given how little we really know about Kilim's, I can see that as a very good idea, quite frankly. Let the works of art speak for themselves, because basically, the people who wove these kilims, the wool may have come from one place. They were, in most cases, nomads, and they spent the different parts of the year in totally different environments, physical environments and artistic environments. So I would think if there were any case where it would really be wonderful to have an exhibition without any labels, and that would be a great one. I think we should always be ready for exciting new ideas, and that sounds like a very nice one.
Thank you. So getting into the area of provenance, a questioner mentions Cambodian artifacts recently repatriated from the Met, and asks whether there have been, or are there currently any comparable or analogous provenance issues involving carpets that you're aware of?
No, the answer is no. The carpets were, the Cambodian stuff at the Met was religious art taken from temples in the jungle, basically, that had fallen, that had been overgrown by the jungle. And then when Europeans became interested in them, they just pieces were hacked off. The same thing happens in Central America to Mayan and Aztec remains. That's a different situation. Carpets were and have always been commercial objects, and they've been crossing frontiers from the beginning. So it's a comparable situation. Certainly, if the Met found out that it owned a carpet that had been taken illegally from, let's say, a Jewish family in Germany in the late 1930s, or had it been stolen from a museum someplace. And I've had a number of cases where I've had to deal with carpets that were stolen from museums that had to be repatriated. That would certainly be a reason for returning a carpet. But otherwise, these carpets, many of them were royal gifts, but they've been on the marketplace. They've been in the marketplace for such a long time that none of the applicable laws would apply, nor would we have any idea as to whom to return them to. The Anhalt carpet at the Met was probably given by the Shah of Persia to the Sultan of Turkey. He gave it to his chief general, who took it with him on campaign and then it was captured in Europe. When the Turkish camp was sacked, ended up in the family of a German nobleman, was sold to Duveen in the late 1920s during the mega inflation in Germany, and ended up in the United States. I mean, who owns that carpet? Well, the Met owns that carpet today, and probably will for the rest of its existence.
Switching subjects, but staying in the realm of controversy, and cueing you up front that your answer will need to be brief. You are quoted in Mike Chabot's recent book as saying that some of the larger rugs from Dri may have come from Armenian churches. Could you comment further and briefly, please?
Yes, when I first went to Divry in the early 1970s, and I went to see the mosque there, which is the Great Mosque, which is an amazing building. I noticed and photographed the ruins of a number of very large churches, which had pretty obviously suffered in the intercommunal warfare of 1915. Recently, if you go back to Divry, you will find nothing. Where those churches were, it's just bare. Nothing's left. this type of erasure, which has certainly happened to Islamic monuments in the Balkans, the Serbs have done their best to destroy every trace of Islam in Serbian occupied territories in the Balkans now, also happens on the other side. It happened in Turkey. I think there's very little doubt. It was Ülkü Bates, my Turkish colleague at Hunter College, who first pointed out to me that this is probably where they came from. And I have every reason to believe that some of the larger carpets, which are not typical of what we would find in mosques, really, may very well have come from churches. Yes.
Acknowledging that many of the greatest rugs of Persia are now outside of Iran, and acknowledging that certainly many of the people on this webinar, people from the West, do not have the ability to it's not easy to visit Iran. Could you recommend some places to go to see great Persian carpets?
Well, Persian carpets used to be all that museums were interested in collecting. I mean, they would allow for Mamluk carpets. They would allow a little bit for Ottoman carpets if they were of court design. Well, the Met has great carpets, of course. Chicago has great carpets. No question about that. National Gallery in Washington, the National Gallery of Art, a museum of European art, has a great collection of spectacular Persian carpets, which are very rarely shown. So I can tell you where the great collections are, but I can't tell you any place to go and see a large number of them, except the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Metropolitan. If you can hold your nose, the Mach in Vienna. Those most museums that have any carpet collections at all will have Persian carpets, great Persian carpets. And there are a lot of them around. The problem is they're extremely large. They cannot be displayed constantly because of conservation issues. And many museums that have great ones, Philadelphia, a good place to see them. You can see them on slant boards in with the European paintings in Philadelphia. There are lots of places. It's actually much easier to go to a museum and see a great early Persian carpet than it is to go to a museum and see a great 19th century Anatolian carpet. And the more it's the pity, of course. I suppose we should be grateful for what we have. But yes, we could have, as the first question was, we could show a lot more if we wanted to. And getting museums to want to is still a bit of an effort.
Okay, focusing on the mundane, but important, how often do you recommend that carpets should be rotated? I'm assuming that the questioner has them in his or her house.
Well, rotating them at home is a different matter from rotating them in a museum. In a museum, our main concern is only light. And carpets actually, not silk carpets, but carpets with wool pile, using traditional dye stuffs, show a remarkable resistance to fading. And it can be, museums will show carpet for a 3-year rotation or a 5-year rotation. Museums tend to be a lot pickier than we are at home. If you're lucky enough to have more, or if you're a compulsive enough collector that you have far more carpets than you have space for them. Again, from the point of view of light, don't let any direct light come in on them, please. Not even any direct sunlight. If you want to look at a carpet in direct sunlight, take it outside on the deck or in the patio and enjoy it for a few minutes, but then bring it back inside and keep it out of the direct light. But otherwise, it's a good idea if carpet's on the floor to reverse the direction so it doesn't get all worn in the very same place all the time, to pay a special attention to any damage to the edges and ends, because those are the first things to go. And basically, rotate. One of the things that I like about what I learned as just learning about collecting, I went to the house of an MIT professor, the chairman of the chemistry department at MIT, Jack Irvin, and he kept his carpets. He had a lot of them, and they were all small in a great big chest. And every Sunday we would go over and arrange the carpets in a pattern in his living room. And every Sunday we do a different pattern and had different things together. It was more fun than a barrel of monkeys. And if you're lucky enough to have that kind of thing, do it that way. But otherwise, if you've got lots of them, why not see as many of them as possible? Just try to keep anything from constantly hanging for more than 3 or 4 years. It's good to give it a rest.
Thank you. And thank you for thought-provoking, fascinating talk. It's been a tremendous pleasure for us to host you, Walter, as well as for the audience. Let us end sort of where we began, and let me compress a number of, combine a number of comments from members of the audience, which is the central question of how to engage younger people, scholars, to carry on yours and others' work and push inquiry into new or perhaps old, the new inquiries into the old realms, to engage young people who have, in some cases, minimalist interiors, but yet are eager for the uniqueness and color and beauty of a handmade work of art like a rug. We have some people commenting here that blockbuster exhibitions are the way. We have a commenter, someone commenting about Carpet Textile Forum out in California in May, which welcomes new collectors. There are other events. I'll put in a plug for webinars as a way to learn a little bit without leaving your dining room. Last word to you, Walter.
Well, all of these are good things, and things like making a lecture like this available to anybody who's got a computer, which is a lot of people these days. That's a great way of doing it. I think basically nothing really succeeds like getting close to the carpets themselves. Now, tastes change, and yes, minimalist decoration, or silly fads like having no brown wood visible in your house, all these idiotic things that are just a ploy used by decorators and people to make money. That's all it is. It's all about money, basically. It's I don't like having my taste manipulated by telling me I should like or should not like something, but making things available to people. If you've got carpets at home, and someone young comes into the house, you might actually just say, hey, what do you think about this? It's great to take a look, Jean, at your just at your picture that I'm looking at now, and to see that a carpet looks absolutely fabulous on the wall. People have this idea that carpet should be on the floor. They look great on the walls. They look great on tabletops. You can't do that with paintings. You can't put a painting on the floor. You can't put a painting on a tabletop. They're versatile. They're fun to touch. They change every light, every different light you put them in. You get a totally different work of art. There are all kinds of reasons, but the best thing I think we could all do is whenever we get the chance to share our enthusiasms, because I think once people actually touch carpets, I think many of them get hooked for life. So, and of course, that's something museums can't do. That's something that collectors can do. So, my advice to you is let people touch the merchandise. It's a wonderful way to get them hooked on this very, very beautiful medium that we all love so much.
Thank you. What a great idea. And now with auctions, there's so much coming for sale. Some of it is really reasonable, and you can paw the merchandise. It's really fun. All right. Thank you so much, Walter. It's been an honor and a pleasure to host you. Thank you to everyone in our audience.
Thank you.
Good night.